panelist today is going to be Ingrid Castro. Dr. Ingrid B. Castro is a professor of sociology at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. She has an MA and PhD in sociology and 2 graduate certificates in cinema studies and women and gender studies. She is the editor of 4 collected volumes and the author of Gender, Race, Inequality, and Student Friendship in Higher Education, A Terrain of Struggle, Bloomsbury forthcoming, and The Vestiges of Childhood, Children's Material Culture, Monstrosity, and the Horror Film, University Press of Mississippi in process. Those both sound fantastic. Looking forward to them when they come out. Our second presenter today is Allison Laurence. Allison Laurence is a cultural historian, essayist, and educator, and currently at work on Dinostalgia, which sounds so cool. A book about dinosaurs as modern American monsters. Her academic and public writing fixates on museums, animals, and extinction. Allison is a lecturer at College 9 at University of California, Santa Cruz, and an editor for Contingent Magazine. We have one more panelist, but I will introduce them if they come. All right.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Good? Yes, good. A little tired. I don't know. Yeah, I'm excited. What I'm presenting today is one of the chapters for the second book that was mentioned on children's material culture and the horror film. I really love talking about children's material culture. It's something that's not really discussed very often in academia, right? Because children are ignored. And then, of course, the stuff of children is ignored even more, right? So I wanted to, in this book, I approach it from a gender perspective, also a family perspective. And so I was trying to think of something that was specifically very boy material culture that is present quite a bit in horror films. And I came up with the bicycle. What's really interesting about, and by the way, this is an image from one of the films that I looked at. So what's interesting is to think about the bicycle in terms of people's mobilities, right? The social geography of childhood. And what's very interesting, and I don't know if I apologize, I missed the keynote, but I don't know if this was mentioned, that a lot of times, like, talking about masculinity always means starting with femininity. So it's sort of like you start with the femininity and then you figure out what femininity is not allowed to be. And usually that equals to what masculinity is. And it's very true of the invention of the bicycle, right? So with the invention of the bicycle in the early 1800s, it was very much a transport for men, and women were not allowed to really have anything to do with the bicycle until the safety bicycle was invented. And if you don't know what a safety bicycle is a bike that has 2 same-sized wheels on it, right? So prior to the safety bicycle, you had the one giant wheel and the one tiny wheel. And so women then were like, okay, we can now start riding the bicycle in the 1880s. But at the same time, there were all these opinions about women riding bicycles, right? So there were warnings of something called bicycle face, right? Like that, you have to be careful not to have bicycle face when you're riding the bicycle if you're a woman. And you can imagine what bicycle face really meant to people. It was sort of like that, like looking like you were strained, right? Or like out of breath, right? Or, because the whole point of being, and of course, by the way, a lot of this has to do specifically with white women, right? Like, especially like, mid to upper class white women, but, the cult of true womanhood, right? That women are supposed to be pious and they're supposed to be pure and they're supposed to be submissive and they have to be sort of the image of domesticity. And, bicycle face was not something that fell into any of that. And then also there were warnings about religious warnings, and especially warnings about bicycling on Sundays, specifically more for women than men, right? That like, I don't know if bikes are really like approved, right, for women in terms of like the Lord or whatever. So, the last part, and obviously the biggest part of this was that the bike actually took women out into public. right? So instead of them like being very localized within their home or within their small community, then they could actually go farther afield on their own, right? They didn't have to ask anyone to bring them anywhere or to accompany them anywhere. They could actually do it on their own. And by the way, I don't know if you all know this, some of you might know this, but bloomers were invented for women who rode bicycles, right? So like, because they had to wear skirts, and it was seen as like untoward, right? That like you might be able to see up a woman's skirt while she was riding a bicycle. So the bloomer was invented. And those of you who are younger and you might not know what a bloomer is, it's like short ties or whatever. And the precursor actually to the pedal pusher. And of course, the pedal pusher is a bicycle reference, right? You're pedaling a thing. So, all right. So, oh, this is like skipping. We just went to the end. No. Can somebody help me with this? Oh my God. All right. Well, here's this, but this thing? This thing. Why is it skipping? If I press this, it goes to the end. All right, I'll try the arrow. Yeah, I think so. Let's see. Yes. Okay, so sorry, you like just got like a little taste of what's at the very end. Now we know all of the kind of why women and by proxy girls, but of course girls were never really mentioned, right? It's all about kind of like the structure of womanhood at that time in the 1800s. But so we get all that stuff about, women and why they shouldn't ride, but then it also has to do with sort of like the idea of a gendered mobilities. And so, if we fast forward to today, a lot of it really still calls back to the 1880s, 1890s, warnings. So, first of all, research today, when people interview teen girls and teen boys and then interview adults who used to ride bikes, and this is an international phenomenon. This isn't like just the US or like just Canada or whatever. Every single country they have done research on in terms of gender mobilities, everybody says the same thing, which is that, oh no, girls can ride bikes, but only to a certain point, right? And at some point, then girls really shouldn't ride bikes that much anymore. And so this message about, the 1880s, 1890s message of like bike riding is immodest and sexually provocative, and it is inappropriate for women. We still get those messages today. So that list that you see here under current research, these are all reasons why girls or women or boys or men have talked about how girls shouldn't or women shouldn't ride bicycles. So it has to do with your age, right? At a certain age, you age out of it for girls, but not for boys. Time of day. So it's okay if girls or women ride bikes during the daytime when it's light out, but they really shouldn't be doing it at night because then it puts them in danger. Dress, right? That they have to dress a certain way. And if, girls or young women want to attract a boy or a young man, then they really need to dress a certain way. And that does not align with how you have to dress when you're riding a bicycle. There's also body shaming. So, one has to have a certain physique in order to ride a bicycle. And if you don't, then you should not be on a bicycle if you are a female. That it's unfeminine. Also, menstruation comes up a lot. So that ends up being kind of tying back to the age thing, right? So oh, well, you can ride a bike, but not if you get your period, then you don't ride bikes anymore. Because you obviously can't ride a bike when you're menstruating. And safety and fear, which some of that goes back to the time of day, but it's even more so when we're talking about traffic, right? So girls and women are saying well, I'm scared of traffic and it's dangerous, right? It's dangerous for us. Whereas you don't get those messages with the boys and the men. And then homosexualization. So the last one is that girls and women sometimes get called things like that they're a dyke if they ride a bike, right? That they're gay if they ride a bike, that they're not women or not female enough if they are riding a bike. And so it comes down to these last few things, which is that it is considered worldwide to be a deviant practice for girls and women, girls of a certain age and then women. And that there's a stigma that gets reinforced by their peers, right? Their friends, as well as their own families, and then public policing, right? Just like random people on the street yelling things to them. And just, I just wanted to kind of like, point out that even in like the bicycle riding kingdom of the world, the Netherlands, there are less teenage girls that ride bikes than boys. At their teenage years, all of a sudden they stop riding bikes as much when the girls do, where, you know, but then once they become older women, then they start riding them again. But there's that like period in there where they stop. And it's because of these kinds of messages that they're being taught and told. All right. And so then we get into kind of what do we mean by boyhood masculinities? And so there's quite a bit of performativity, and I'm sure that some of this was discussed in the talk that you just went to. But in terms of the boys, you know, it has to do with these specific things. So, you know, virility, bravery and risk, physical prowess, emotionless, and heterosexual, where some of those, if we went backwards, some of those are included in why girls can't bike, right? Because it's too dangerous for them, and because you know, they are supposed to be heterosexual and they get made fun of for not being. And so we have these sort of three different ways of talking about this. The first, probably the most popular, is doing gender, right? How do people perform gender? The second is gender projects. What are the types of things that people erect in order to perform that gender? And the third is gender regimes. That's how people police it, right? So what is the regime of policing gender? And then the question becomes, well, what does it mean to do boy, right? So if we do gender, a lot of times we then have to think about, well, what does it mean to do woman or to do man? Here I'm asking, well, what does it mean to do boy? You know, in life and on screen. And so there were 4 rules of masculinity that were established in 1976. And it was number 1, no sissy stuff. Number 2, be a big wheel. Number 3, the sturdy oak. And number 4, give 'em hell. Ironically, be the big wheel really reflects back on bicycling, right? And so no sissy stuff means that you have to be heterosexual, right? Number 2, be the big wheel. It means being in charge, right? Number 3, the sturdy oak. It means maintaining emotional control. You don't cry. You don't show your emotions. And number 4, to strive to give them hell. It means you have to be aggressive, right? You have to, like, you know, pose, right? Pose masculinity. So I was really interested in looking at what does it mean to do boy in films about male serial killers, specifically those that have to do with some of these aspects that I just discussed, which is like peers and family. And so the 3 films that I looked at were The Clove Hitch Killer, Summer of '84, and Super Dark Times. Interestingly, all of these were made or released within a year time span, right? Like 2017 and 2018, they all came out at the same time. Clove Hitch Killer was the most kind of like, largest kind of production value and actually released in theaters. And the other 2 were, are considered to be independent films. Probably the least known is Super Dark Times. That one's not even rated, right? Because it didn't come out in theaters. And by the way, it's like the best one as far as I'm concerned. It's really, really interesting. So there are some things that happen within each of these films. And the number 1 is relationships to girls. You know, heteronormative sexuality. There is talking and bragging and jealousy in all of them. You know, the boys get jealous of each other, right? Because one like has a relationship with a girl or thinks they might have a relationship with a girl, or a girl is talking to them even, versus the other ones who don't have those kinds of relationships with girls in high school or in their community. Then we get the bragging, right? So like one saying, like, oh, I got to third base. Again, a very Du Bois reference, right? Because it has to do with baseball. Right? First base, second base, third base is like doing boyhood. And so, oh, I got to third base. And then the other ones are like, no, there's no way. Da, 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 da. Yeah, you were on vacation. Okay. Their relationships to peers, which is that they need to suffer in silence, right? That they have to be not emotional. That if they are suffering, they don't talk about it. They do it in their room. There's a lot of scenes in these films where they're by themselves in their room and upset, right? Like hitting a wall or crying or, those sorts of things by themselves, not with others. On the other side of it is when we do have kind of a team, and the team aspect is more in Summer of 84 than the rest, where we get 4 boys. Then there's sort of this feeling of like, we got to work together to solve the problem. Interestingly, in Summer of 84, even though there's 4 boys, they actually sort of pair off into 2, so that they take a quad and they go into dyad, and dyad relationships are much more typical of girls than boys. And so they have these like 2 dyads going at the same time in that film. And then relationships to parents. A lot of the parents in these films are missing. Either they're not there, and it's never explained where they are, right? It's just they're never around. So either they're not around, or we also have keeping a secret about relationships to parents. So that can have to do with either what's going on with the parents, so like, severe domestic violence in the home. Or, for example, one of the boys in Summer of 84, his mom is single and she drinks. So she's constantly drunk. And so he sort of takes care of himself. She's just always passed out. There are definitely, and by the way, keeping the secret also has to do with keeping the secret of the serial killer from the other parents, right? Or from the authorities. By the way, not in any of these films do they ever contact the police. None of them, right? All these kids are like, we can do it ourselves. Like right? And that goes back to this like bravery, right? Like taking charge, being the big wheel, right? I'm going to figure this out and nobody else is. Not once are the police called the whole time. So there are definitely kind of tropes. And sorry, this gets cut off here. I promise it wasn't like this in my presentation. So there are certain tropes. The number one trope that we always get in films about children is the loss of innocence. And certainly we have that here in these films, that all of their experiences in terms of these serial killers lead to a severe loss of innocence. I want to mention that all the boys are in the same age range in these films too. They all range in the 15 to 16-year-old range. Most of them are 15. There is one boy in Super Dark Times that's in the 8th grade. And it's really interesting because he's still in middle school. And then we've got these two high school kids. And the middle school kid he's like sort of the more bigger wheel. He's like, stay away from me. Don't talk to me. This never happened. Because in that particular film, one of the boys kills another boy. Right. So the 8th grader has much more of a hold on sort of this idea about being masculine. Right. He's like, I don't know you. This never happened. Right. And then the 2 that are the main tropes that we get amongst there's kind of one main boy character in each of these films, and they reflect these 2 tropes, which is the boy who looks. The boy who looks is a boy who is behind the door, right? Kind of can see what's going on, right? Never lets on that he's there, right? It's the silent witness. And of course, probably the most famous silent witness is in the movie Witness, if you've ever seen Witness, right? The Amish boy who witnesses something, keeps his silence, right? And then we have the curious boy. And the curious boy is the boy who like sort of thinks that there's something going on and wants to discover what's going on, right? Takes it to the next level, starts doing investigations on his own. And all of these boys do this to a certain degree. So now we get the mobilities part, right? And, what does bicycle mean to doing boy? And in all these films, it's mostly boys on bikes, although not 100%, right? So, in the Clove Hitch Killer, like, the main boy, Tyler, he doesn't really have a close male friend. He does have one, but he's super religious. And so he just tells him to like leave him alone. And so he needs to find someone. And so he ends up finding a girl, who he can team up with. So in that particular film, here he is here with the original friend who was a boy, and then here he is here with his second friend, a girl who he can then investigate what's going on. And if you've never seen it, he thinks his dad is a serial killer, which it turns out, sorry to say, he is. And by the way, this is based off of the BTK murders, loosely, not directly, but pretty much. And then in the second one, these two are from Super Dark Times, and we can see here that these are the two main boys, and then this is the boy who ends up getting killed by one of them, and then the 8th grader is here too. And in that particular case, one of the boys, his name is Josh. His older brother is in the military, and he knows that his brother has a katana sword that he left behind. And so he gets a sword and he's showing off, right? And this goes back to like doing boy, right? Showing off with the sword. And he gets in a fight with the third one in on the right, and he stabs him and kills him. And then what happens is that Josh gets the taste for blood and he becomes the serial killer. And so then it's up to his best friend, Zach, to figure out what's going on, because people start dying, and his friend Josh is sort of like starts changing a little bit. And so he's convinced, that his friend has gotten a taste for blood and has started killing more and more people. And then in the third one at the top, we have Davy. And then at the bottom, we have the 3 other boys that Davy hangs around with. And what's interesting is those 3 boys, each one has a nickname. So we have Eats after his last name Eaton. We have Woody after his last name Woodworth. And then we have Faraday, which is exactly his last name. The only one who has an actual first name that's used the whole way through is Davy, right? Which is very interesting to think about in terms of Davy, as well as Zach, as well as Tyler, being a little bit different. So here we have the boy code images. There are many more, right? But the boy code images in these films has everything to do with liking girls, right? And being heterosexual. And so, even the first one up there is from Summer 84, and Woody, who Woody ends up dying in the end. But Woody, at one point, he says, vaginas are magical. All of these boys are, this is a direct quote from a review of one of these films, but it applies to all of them. Virginal and frustrated. That's what these boys are, right? They are virginal, they are frustrated, they're adolescent boys, and these are coming of age nightmares, right? That this is a nightmare about a boy coming of age that, he never got to experience his true innocence of becoming a man by having sex with a girl, and instead they have to deal with all of these terrible things that happen to them because these serial killers that live next door to them or in their family, or one of them even becomes a serial killer. And so, and by the way, I should also mention that Summer of 84, it's like Gremlins on steroids. There are so many references to 80s in there. everything. I mean, from Cabbage Patch to Gremlins to Space Camp to Poltergeist to, I mean, I could like keep going on and on and on. Atari and comic books. And it's like an homage to boyhood from the 80s in that film. And so then the question becomes, well, what about these three boys, right? The three main boys, Davy, Zach, and Tyler. Do they represent a different kind of boyhood, right? And so there has been some theory done on there is something that exists called a hybrid masculinity, right? Which is not necessarily a straight masculinity, but a different kind of masculinity. It takes in some of the traits from the sort of heteronormative, heterotypical definitions of masculinity, like be the big wheel and sturdy as an oak, and right, those 4 rules from the 70s. And then takes that and then takes in some of what has traditionally been thought of as of much more femininity, right? Like being emotional and being caring. And so each of these boys really does represent, so this hybrid masculinity. So they are knowing boys, so and I theorize the knowing boy as these two aspects. So number one is that they're sensitive. They get nervous, they cry, they can say, I love you. And they say, I love you to peers or to their parents, which is not very typical when you see doing boy in film. And it's very meaningful when they do. Right. It's not like, oh, like, I love you, mom. See ya. It's like a real meaningful, I love you. And then, for example, in Super Dark Times, Zach says it to Josh at the end when Josh is trying to kill him. Josh is trying to kill his best friend. And Zach says, what is going on here? Like, we are best friends. Like, I love you. What are you doing? And then at the end of Clove Hitch Killer, during a kind of partial eulogy when he's getting his Ranger Award, we have kind of this eulogy to his father, who is a killer, right? Who is dead. And Tyler says, Dad, if you can hear me, I love you. Right. And by the way, he and his friend Cassie convinced him to kill himself because they didn't want to turn him into the police. And at one point, he says that the boy says, I need to protect our family, right? He didn't want their family to go through like the media explosion and the severe problems that would happen to his mom and to his sister. And so instead, they just let him kill himself and, move on with life. And then they're also quiet. They're very quiet. So of all the boys in all the films, they're the ones who are the most quiet. They really watch instead of talk. When their friends are doing something that they think is bad, they tell them, stop doing that, right? So like, if they're peeping in somebody's window with binoculars, for example, like all the three friends and some of the 84, like looking at the neighbor Nikki in the binoculars. And then we have, Davy in the back going like, what are you doing? Stop it. Like, don't do that, And by the way, I remember this happening to myself when I was like young, that there were some boys like in the neighborhood looking through my window when I was getting changed. And, it just so happened that one of my brothers was there because they were all kind of the same age. One of my brothers, I could hear him from outside. He was like, Ingrid, like, get down. Like, like watching out for me, And so, and then they're also very observational about their surroundings. So this goes back to this idea of like knowing something, right? That they like observe what's going on. They're really much more sensitive than quote unquote the average boy, right? Which is what all the other boys are in these films. So that's what I've got.
Hi, I'm Allison. Oh, I see we have a low battery alert here. It's plugged in. You got it? Okay. Hi, everyone. I guess while we wait for that, one of the shared things across our talks, I think, is going to be like the nightmare of suburbia, perhaps.
I didn't really mention that, but that's definitely part of it.
Yeah. So maybe that's something we'll be able to think about together. There's some city stuff in my story, but eventually we venture out. Okay, so today I'm going to tell you a story about how an oil company leveraged dinosaurs, which are the most charismatic of fossil animals, to fuel oil culture, unleashing monsters into the hearts and minds of kids and other consumers in mid-century America. But first, maybe some keywords. So, dinomania, pretty self-evident. Enthusiasm or extreme passion for dinosaurs. We see the word take root in the late 1980s, which coincides with widespread commercialization of dinosaurs in the wake of the so-called dinosaur renaissance, a time of renewed scientific interest in dinosaurs. This follows several decades of the dinosaur doldrums, when scientists weren't actually all that interested in dinosaurs. They were seen as lumbering brutes. But in the 80s, things started to change. So Petromania, or petroleumania, is not recognized by the OED. But if we follow the same formula, it's an enthusiasm or extreme passion for fossil fuels. Obviously, petromania is a zeal for rocks, but people seem to prefer the abridged version instead of the petroleum. And it is in use, even though it's not a recognized word in the dictionary. It's often used in reference to a loss of perspective that's coupled with the potential for vast monetary gain from the sale of hydrocarbons. In my talk today, though, instead of focusing on collective mania of resource-cursed states, I want to think about the affective experience for consumers, right? The emotional attachments to the lifestyles that are afforded by fossil fuels. So, in 1916, Harry F. Sinclair established Sinclair Oil and Refining Corporation, initially headquartered in New York City. Sinclair the man may best be known for his involvement in the Teapot Dome bribery scandal, an illegal land leasing affair that dogged the Harding administration. Sinclair himself went to prison for 6 months in 1929, not for the illegal leases or for bribing the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, but for jury tampering. In 1930, perhaps to distract the public from the company president scandal, though I can't say this for certain, the archive has failed me here, Sinclair Oil rebranded right after he got out of prison and began advertising its petroleum products with sensational dinosaurs. In 1932, the company trademarked a green sauropod, sometimes called a brontosaurus, sometimes a patasaurus, as its logo. Ads that ran in papers across the US during the autumn of 1930 linked the Sinclair name and its petroleum products to images of long extinct life. Sinclair's Mobiline had mellowed 100 million years, the tagline on these ads read, while scaly monsters fought, while ferns grew high as trees, while the Stegosaurus drank from Pennsylvania's springs. These ads emphasized the extreme age of the crude oils that the company refined into motor oil. The idea being that the older the oil, the better. Sinclair was not actively suggesting that its fossil fuels contained the remains of dinosaurs, because they don't. Instead, the point here is that Sinclair's oil was even older than those dinosaurs, right? So nature was already mellowing and filtering this oil under the earth while these creatures were roaming above. So I'm going to take us on a brief detour to the modern day, because a century later, the icon is still in use, the trademarked logo, and it remains a lure. So in late September of this year, someone stole this particular dinosaur, Claire, from a franchised Sinclair station in Brentwood in Los Angeles. The neighborhood held a memorial for the dinosaur. Actress Jamie Lee Curtis posted a scolding video on social media. The police got involved, and within 10 days, Claire was returned to her rightful station, bearing an apology note from the anonymous and penitent thief. What I'm emphasizing here is that there exists sincere and commanding emotional attachments to Sinclair's trademark dinosaur and dinosaurs more generally. Okay, detour over. Let's head back into the past. Now we're going to the mid-20th century, when Sinclair's dino advertising embraced children as a target market. This wasn't entirely novel for Sinclair. The company had previously created kid-friendly promotions, but a competitive oil market seems to have inspired an even more enthusiastic embrace, or perhaps extraction, of the seemingly renewable resource of a child's wonder. So during the summer of 1962, for instance, we have these inflatable beach toys, bright green, shaped like the iconic logo, sold to consumers. Other promotions, like the sale of, the giveaway of stamp books, forced families to return to Sinclair stations week after week. So if you wanted to get all 12 free stamps for your stamp book, you had to convince your family to go fill up at Sinclair every week for several months, right? So the stamps were free, but you had to make your way over and, maybe fill up your tank while you were there. So these promotions courted parents' pocketbooks through their children, configuring kids as consumers in the present who could influence where the family income was spent. But they were also an investment in the future, right? An effort to build brand loyalty before these young consumers and imagined future customers could even drive. So one of these targeted children later recalled that he and his friends used to, quote, badger their parents to buy their gas at Sinclair so they could collect and trade the dinos. Perhaps the dinosaur stamps, I'm not sure, he didn't clarify. So Sinclair's child-friendly strategy, I'm gonna play a video here, was supersized with the creation of Dinoland, which debuted at the New York World's Fair in Queens in 1964. The outdoor exhibit purported to show life as it existed 165 million years ago, authentically and vividly recreated, which was impossible, an impossible ambition, given that the 9 dinosaurs represented in fiberglass form, so Brontosaurus, Stegosaurus, Triceratops, T-Rex, and some others, existed over a span of 100 million years, right? They were not geological contemporaries, all of them. Regardless of anachronisms, Dinoland was a hit, and kids wanted more. Inquiries poured in from hundreds of young dinosaur enthusiasts living as close as Queens and as far as New Zealand, asking what would happen to the creatures after the fair closed. Some children offered to open their homes to these unusual pets. 8-year-old Michael, who lived near the Flushing Fair site, requested one of the smaller models, and he promised to take very good care of it, which would be easy, he explained, because I know all about dinosaurs, and my mom has a nice backyard. Young Brian of Long Island added weight to his appeal for an informational booklet about the dinosaurs, misspelled with an E, by signing his note as a stockholder. And James from New Jersey asked if he could have a dinosaur poster to hang in his bedroom. In a postscript, he bargained, "I'll make my daddy stop at your gas station." So Sinclair judged Dinoland to be an advertising success, and after the fair closed, took the exhibit on tour. From the winter of 1966 through the end of the decade, the herd of fiberglass dinosaurs toured the eastern half of the United States, setting up primarily in the parking lots of suburban shopping centers, as well as at licensed Sinclair gas stations and sometimes on state fairgrounds. Millions of Americans, particularly families with young children, visited Dinoland when it came to town. Some schools even organized field trips to see what Sinclair touted externally as an educational exhibit about dinosaurs and natural resource conservation. But internally, Sinclair described Dinoland to employees and to shareholders as a way for the public to learn about Sinclair's products. To shareholders, Sinclair reported that the tour reached millions of consumers in the marketing territory during the dinosaurs' first year on the road. So they only toured within the marketing territory. They did not come out here to California. By conservative estimates, at least 20 million Americans, which was about 10% of the nation's population at the time, saw Dinoland by the time the tour concluded at the end of the 1960s. So what made these dinosaurs monstrous? Well, the oil company and tour partners labeled them as such. It's an actor's category. Advertisements for the exhibit proclaimed that monsters were coming to town, and sensational promotions emphasized the beastly nature of the menagerie. The most outrageous scenes emerged from the 1963 journey to the World's Fair site. So the dinosaurs were secured to a barge, and Dinoland, the whole exhibit, was transported from the sculptor's studio in Churchtown, New York, down the Hudson River and around Manhattan to the fairgrounds. This journey was advertised in advance with a timeline, so New Yorkers in Westchester or Midtown Manhattan or near the Brooklyn Bridge could head toward the river when they floated past. And ads for Dinoland events often urged adult newspaper readers to bring the whole family and to bring a camera too, right? Because no one will believe you unless you take photos. So I'm going to hand it over to the British Pathé newsreader now to tell you a little bit more.
As strange a cargo as ever embarked since the days of Noah comes down the Hudson, a floating preview of a World's Fair exhibit. The 8 assorted dinosaurs are life-size and will be placed in a setting to remind the world of tomorrow of the world of many yesterdays ago. If their fiberglass eyes could see, they would no doubt find the Manhattan skyline as startling as it does them. The harbor fireboats have welcomed historic visitors, but few prehistoric ones.
Few prehistoric ones. Okay, so the press dubbed Dinoland's creator, Louis Paul Jonas, as a monster maker. But Jonas, who had previously worked as a taxidermist and a sculptor at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, didn't think of his dinosaurs as monsters. They were real animals once. He took the work of modeling extinct creatures very seriously. He referenced comparative anatomical texts and consulted with paleontologists to produce plausible and scientifically informed reconstructions of creatures that are ever at a distance, right? Animals that we cannot observe, that we cannot fully know. But he did his best, and he still had a lot of contacts at the AMNH in New York, and he collaborated with Barnum Brown, a paleontologist in New York, as well as John Ostrom, who was at Yale, to get, a decent picture, right? The scientifically up-to-date versions of these dinosaurs. And if you've ever visited the AMNH, you might have seen some habitat dioramas that Jonas created. So Carl Akeley is the most famous taxidermist who worked at the AMNH, but Jonas worked with Akeley. And if you've seen the Asian elephants there, that's him, right? So the African elephants were Akeley, but Jonas did the Asian elephants and a number of other dioramas as well. Okay, so he took it seriously, right? Dinosaurs are real animals. The press is calling him monster maker, but he says they're real animals. That's not to say, though, that he was above having some fun with his subjects. So when Dinoland visited a shopping center in Orlando in 1966, the plaza's retailers staged a fashion show. Jonas, who spent his winters in Florida, was in attendance. So you can see here, this is local ladies who are putting on a fashion show with clothing from local retailers. So the local merchants associations would cover some of the cost of bringing Dinoland to town, right? So dinos and dolls, right? In the expectation that the dinosaurs would attract consumers and convince them to open their wallets, right? So Sinclair's emphasis on monstrosity was a sales tactic. But there's another monstrous quality to Dinoland and to dinosaurs as we know them more generally. Dinosaurs are matter out of place and time, with thanks to Mary Douglas. They challenge boundaries of the known natural world, troubling Western taxonomy, resisting simple categorization. They are the subjects of scientific interpretation and frequent reinterpretation. So in 1968, while Dinoland was touring the United States, paleontologists were overhauling inherited understandings of dinosaurs. This was the moment when, based on new fossil finds like Deinonychus, which is the animal that inspired the raptors, the velociraptors of Jurassic Park, scientists were starting to embrace a novel notion that dinosaurs were fleet of foot and mind as well. So dinosaurs are monstrous because they are mutable. These animals that we can't ever apprehend, not really. They're used and reused to sell any manner of things and ideas. Sinclair Oil used dinosaurs to produce and theoretically reproduce profits by advertising to adults and to their children, taking kids seriously as current and future customers. Sinclair aimed to instill positive associations between fossil animals and fossil fuels, particularly Sinclair's fossil fuels. And I'll mention here the photo on the right, the young girl with on the left of that photo with the red hat and the corduroy pants. That's Debbie Douglas, Professor Debbie Douglas, who is Director of Collections at the MIT Museum. And she's also the current president for the Society for the History of Technology. And about a decade ago, I was her TA. So, many people exist who experienced Dinoland in real life. In 1969, the Dinoland tour ended, and Sinclair sold off its assets to Atlantic Richfield. So the Sinclair that exists today is a different, revived version of the original company. And the Dino logo and assets sort of faded for a little bit of time. In the 1970s, were hit with oil shock, right? So children raised in Sinclair's marketing sphere who were trained to prefer this brand over another, they aged into driving during a national energy crisis that witnessed fuel shortages and long lines at the gas station. So Dinoland's children bought gasoline wherever they could find it. Still, Sinclair's monsters lived on, and they escaped containment, which Cohen tells us monsters are wont to do. So Sinclair's dinosaurs took on new cultural forms. So as I sort of move toward a conclusion, I want to introduce you to another descendant of Dinoland. Yeah. Yes. So Dinosaurs, it's a satirical television show. Like Sinclair Oil, the Henson Company saw the potential for dinosaurs to speak to children and adults alike. In collaboration with Walt Disney Television, Henson produced the Saurian family sitcom that aired on ABC from 1991 to 1994. It premiered after Jim Henson's death, but he was heavily involved in the ideation and the production initially. So Dinosaurs is an explicit send-up of oil culture, and the show is centered on the Sinclair family. So we have parents Earl and Fran, kids Robbie and Charlene, and then there's Grandma Ethel, which is spelled with a Y, like the ethane derivative. So like contemporaneous sitcoms, Dinosaurs attended to daily family dramas in episodic fashion. So Charlene wants new clothes to impress her friends. Earl can't stand his mother-in-law. But the show's longer narrative is a tragedy of resource extraction and overconsumption. Earl's job at the We Say So Development Corporation is to push over trees. Like literally, he's just killing trees for his job. And in the series finale, the Sinclairs and all their Pangean neighbors face extinction due to climate change brought on by the dinosaurs' environmental degradations. The sitcom, it's a direct descendant of Sinclair's monstrous marketing, disowned the work of its forebear. In the early 90s, it warned of the world that Dino-Petromania and enthusiastic overconsumption more generally could bring into being. But too few have listened, right? So Sinclair Oil, under new ownership, began an aggressive expansion project in 2016, which was the company's centennial year, pledging to double Dino's footprint. The company's trademark dinosaurs would, according to a spokesperson, become common sights across the nation once more. Sinclair's marketing is no longer reliant on Dinomania alone. It cashes in on nostalgia now, too. Dinostalgia. A longing to return to a seemingly simpler time where, for some, memories of childhood and carefree car culture merge. So Sinclair Oil taught kids to love fossil fuels and, by extension, non-renewable energy regimes through their affection for dinosaurs. Today, Dinoland's children are aging into their golden years. If our kind has any hope of avoiding what happened to Jim Henson's dinosaurs, who fell to an unnatural extinction event, we must resist the sensationalized consumer cultures that dinosaurs have long been used to promote. We must deploy these charismatic monsters otherwise. Thank you.
What I'd suggest is we start the Q&A, and we may need to interrupt it so that they can get a chance to talk. But with that, thank you so much for those fantastic presentations. I have some questions, but I want to put it out to the audience first. Does anyone have something they want to ask? Okay, well, people are gathering their thoughts. Allison, you mentioned something at the beginning of your talk that I think would be fun to come back to right now, which is sort of this nightmare of suburbia. And so I guess my first question is just putting that back out there and wondering if the two of you could speak to that a little bit and how your talk seemed to come at it from very different directions.
Maybe put this in the middle. Two thoughts.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to find this particular quote. Give me a second. It's right here. Yeah, it's somewhere in 84. It basically ends with, basically like you never know. A serial killer is always somebody's next door neighbor, basically, right? Like there's always somebody who lives next door to a serial killer, and almost always they're like, I never knew he was the nicest guy, right? Like he was such a friendly neighbor, or he just kept to himself, and there is this kind of assumption that, and even in summary, where it discusses the fact that basically suburbia. If they say the craziest shit happens in suburbia, that's like a direct quote. And also in Super Dark Times, it's kind of an homage to suburbia in that, the boys kind of take over the construction that's around. So at one point, there's this image, the camera pans, and you see an image of like a metal part of a building that's shaped like a penis, and somebody wrote under it in capital letters penis, like labeled it as such, right? So there's this very like literal way of defining what suburbia is in terms of masculinity.
I'll just real briefly, if you want to start getting set up. He's getting it. Okay, great. So just super briefly, one of the things that came up in the course I'm teaching just this week is how energy is material, right? Energy regimes are material, but they're also social, right? And something that I think I want to emphasize is that emotion is part of that sociality, right? And so the way that many of our communities in the United States are organized require, us to participate in these energy regimes, these fossil fuel cultures. So it's sort of like a shared nightmare, right? Of suburbia, of sprawl, of exurbia, I guess, right? Where because there hasn't been investment in, public transit beyond certain cities, not even all cities, right? There's this forced reliance on fossil fuels. For now, that could change. We'll see.
Okay, so Shubhneet Kharbanda is an assistant professor at the Department of Education and Elementary Education at Mata Sundri College, University of Delhi, India. She holds degrees in English literature and education with a PhD in children's literature and posthumanism. Her teaching and research focuses on language pedagogy, children's literature, and posthumanism. She has publications and presentations in national and international forums. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. There's a monstrous ball in my head right now. And I'm having a day prior because keeping with the Indian time, one day before you're going to all have it. So yeah, thanks for waiting, and hope this is worth the wait. So on monsters in children's literature, reading Patrick Ness, A Monster Calls Through a Posthumanist Perspective. The presentation is going to focus on monsters. I'm going to give a brief introduction, then moving on to the idea of posthumanism, then children's literature and its interdisciplinary connection with posthumanism. And then we're going to focus on the specific text, A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, and then concluding remarks. So let's go. The subject of monsters has always had a persistent cultural and critical importance. Monstrosity evokes contrasting but strong reactions. Teres, Greek for monster, is suggestive of the repulsive as well as the inviting. Manifesting as an amalgamation of strikingly different forms, the monster is both remarkable and repugnant. Monsters have often been the necessary able for the aesthetic portrayal of human thought and nature. Western conception of the human as a universal standard demarcates any form that does not conform to the standard of normativity as monstrous. The discourse of monstrosity works towards establishing the human as a paragon of what can be called normal, and the monster as all that is not a normal human. Jeffrey Cohen defines the monster as an objecting epistemological device basic to the mechanics of deviance construction and identity formation. Horror comes hand in hand with posthumanism when the apparently fixed lines between the animal, human inanimate, or technological are trespassed. Apart from being physical manifestations, monsters are an embodiment of thinking differently, a medium of going beyond humanism and moving towards posthuman futures. Placing together the discourse of the posthuman and that of monstrosity shows that posthumanism is not just engaged with the subject of the future human, but with the dismantling of traditional understanding of the human subject. Posthumanism investigates the dualisms such as human-animal, human-machine, and in general, human-non-human through a perception that does not work on the oppositional model. The non-hierarchical stance of posthumanism does not accord any primacy to the idea of human and postulates the conditions for an epistemology concerned with the other than human experience as a site of knowledge. Posthumanism draws its impetus from discourses and institutions through which categorization of species has been made possible by means of oppression, exploitation, and annihilation of species. The major contribution of monster studies to posthumanist ideas is that it reveals the problematic of species identity by showing how various criteria, origin, birth, spatial location, essential qualities, form, identifiable species categories have been invoked to relegate particular forms of life to the realm of the monstrous, thereby ensuring a clear boundary for the human. To consider critical posthumanism as established only within critical theory and philosophy, wherein the idea of the human has been the moot point, is to neglect the significant role of popular culture and literature in the reevaluation of the concept of the human. This paper, while delineating critical posthumanist ideas in critical theory and monster studies, concentrates on literary text. Therefore, the rationale for conjoining the critical posthumanism with literary text should be traced herewith. In any society, the transition from childhood to adulthood raises concerns about what it means to be human. The concerns are addressed through various formal and informal means. Children's literature is a fertile ground where philosophy and representation merge, providing a scope that children might think about their being, as well as exploring alternative ontologies made possible by rampant anthropomorphism in books for children. The mutation of ontologies in children's fiction challenges the ideological division between human and non-human. Since children's texts experiment with the idea of being, it puts forth ontological questions to their readers and invite readers to question who they are and what they might become. As Victoria Flanagan in her book Technology and Identity in Young Adult Fiction points out, children's literature is a distinctive literary genre, precisely because it acts as a tool of socialization and therefore explicitly seeks to intervene in children's perception of themselves and the world in which they live. It is this reflection that makes possible further destabilization of boundaries. In literature for children, the demarcations of humanness become porous and the human uniqueness diffusing, breaking down and reaching out to non-human entities. Children's literature lends itself to post-humanist readings owing to a plethora of anthropomorphized beings such as animated machines, toys, animals, fairies, dragons, monster giants, and hybrid human-animal bodies such as centaurs and mermaids that throng its pages. Monsters in children's literature offer scope for engagement with different forms of other, not only physical, but also those within one's own psyche, and provoke one into rethinking what monstrosity means. This paper undertakes the analysis of a monster figure in the selected text, A Monster Calls, written by Patrick Ness, with an objective to bring light to the ways in which it draws attention to the boundaries between humans and non-human monsters. The paper demonstrates that monsters in children's literature and young adult literature provide opportunity to discuss contemporary human concerns such as the struggle to fight the fear of the other, or the deviant, grappling with the monstrous attributes lurking within the humans and the creatures that raise existential concerns, undertaking long adventurous quests to hunt down and tame that which is disruptive and wild. A Monster Calls is a book about a 13-year-old boy whose mother, suffering from cancer, is terminally ill. As he deals with this trauma, he is visited by a monster who materializes from a yew tree. The monster tells him 3 stories during the course of the book, and in turn, Connor has to narrate a story to the monster. But before the monster appears, Connor hears a voice calling out his name, and he tries to identify it. As he tries to make sense of who is calling out to him, he does so by the process of elimination. When he is not able to categorize the voice as being either of his mother or of his dad's, he finally identifies it as monstrous. He thinks to himself that the voice has a quality to it, a monstrous quality, wild and untamed. Soon after, the monster reveals itself to him, emerging from the yew tree in the vicinity of his house. As Connor watched, the uppermost branches of the tree gathered themselves into great and terrible face, shimmering into a mouth and nose and even eyes, peering back at him. Other branches twisted around one another, always squeaking, always groaning, until they formed 2 long arms and a second leg to set down beside the main trunk. The rest of the tree gathered itself into a spine and then a torso. The thin needle-like leaves weaving together to make a green, furry skin that moved and breathed as if there were muscles and lungs underneath. The monstrosity of the monster is established very early on in the book by highlighting the deviance from the human, as suspended between forms, as it emerges from a yew tree, a sort of a hybrid, a tree man, as the monster later calls himself. The body of any monster is one of its essential features that sets it apart from the human physical form. The wild and the untamed form that the yew tree takes reinstates that which the monster theories and studies of the grotesque claim about what constitutes monstrosity. Jeffrey Harfum, in his book on the grotesque, Strategies of the Contradiction in Art and Literature, proposes that monstrosities are made of something illegitimately in something else. Further in elaborating on this idea, he suggests that co-presence harbors the essence of the grotesque, the sense that things that should be kept apart are fused together. This holds true for the monstrous forms as well, which is further explained through an exchange between the monster and Connor. When Connor asks of the monster, "What are you?" the monster frowns. "I am not a what. I am a who." Though Connor's question raises particular anxieties about the monster's monstrousness, the monster, however, turns Connor's question into an ontological one, suggesting that you-ness is not exclusive to humans. It then answers, "I have had as many names as there are years to time itself," roared the monster. "I am Herne the Hunter. I am Cernunnos the eternal green man. I am arm swung down and snatched Connor up in a great arm swung down and snatched Connor up in it, lifting him high in the air, the wind whirling around them, making the monster's leafy skin wave angrily. Who am I? The monster replied, still rolling. I am the spine that the mountains hang upon. I am the tears that the rivers cry. I am the lungs that breathe in the wind. I am the wolf that kills the stag, the hawk that kills the mouse, the spider that kills the fly. I am the stag, the mouse, and the fly that are eaten. I am the snake of the world devouring its tail. I am everything untamed and untamable. It brought Connor up close to its eye. I am this wild earth. Come for you, Connor O'Malley. The monster claims to be one with the elements of nature, denying to be any one of those, yet present in all. It evokes what Cohen claims to be monster's refusal to partake in the definitive order of things. It resists being relegated to any one systemic structuration and is thereby a threat to distinctions. The monster here too represents the extremities of transgression of things. The monster comes up to help Connor deal with his impending loss and shares his wisdom through the 3 stories it tells Connor. Each of the stories that the monster tells Connor leaves him with a question each. How can a queen be both good witch and a bad witch? How can a prince be a murderer and a savior? How can an apothecary be evil-tempered but right-thinking? How can a parson with wrong thinking? How can a parson be wrong-thinking and good-hearted? How can invisible men make themselves more lonely by being seen? In sync with the monster's boundary-straddling being, his wisdom is also one that encourages a way of thinking beyond dualisms. The monster embodies this way of thinking not only in that it exposes human fragility by rendering how their existence cannot be seen in terms of absolutes, for instance of good and bad, rather it exposes them as a merger of contradictions that are otherwise treated as rigid categories in themselves. Also, this wisdom aligns with the post-human thinking because it blurs boundaries between truth, that is Connor's lived reality, and fiction, that is the stories told by the monster. The stories, as the monster says, are the wildest things of all. Stories chase and bite and hunt. These stories reveal to Connor the truth about human existence, and the 4th story that the monster demands from Connor is his ultimate truth. The truth that the monster wants Connor to speak up and thereby come to terms with is that he loves his mother, yet he wants her ordeal to end with her death. As Cohen speaks of the monsters, that they appear at the time of crisis as a kind of third term that problematizes the clash of extremes, as that which questions binary thinking and introduces a crisis. Much in the same way, the monster appears in Connor's life when he is going through a crisis. His mother suffering from cancer, his father not being around because he left them and has another family, his not wanting to live with his grandmother because he is repulsed by her lack of imagination and her finicky ways of maintaining her house, him getting bullied at school, him wanting to be punished in any form because he feels he deserves it for wanting his mother to die, yet not being punished because people all around him pity him for his mother's condition, and most important of all, that he loves his mother but wants it all to be over for her. The monster, through the stories it tells Connor, reveals to him a new way of interpreting and understanding his condition in particular, and the human condition at large, by exposing the dualities that coexist. The monster here stands true to the role that Cohen identifies of monsters to be. That is, the horizon where the monsters dwell might well be imagined as the visible edge of the hermeneutic circle itself. The monster offers an escape from its hermetic path, an invitation to explore new spirals, new and interconnected methods of perceiving the world. Because of this crisis that he faces, Connor is troubled by a nightmare that he calls the real monster, wherein he sees himself standing at the edge of a cliff, holding on to his mother, who screams for him to not let go, but he cannot hold any longer, and she falls off the cliff. When the tree monster wants Connor to tell the 4th tale, he wants him to speak the truth. For this, Connor himself finds himself in his real nightmare, out of which he can escape only if he speaks the truth. You must speak the truth, and you must speak it now. Connor O'Malley, say it. You must. I can't. It'll kill me if I do, he gasped. "It will kill you if you do not," the monster said. "You must say it. I can't." "You let her go. Why?" "Why, Connor?" the monster said fiercely. "Tell me why before it's too late." And he spoke the words. He spoke the truth. He told the rest of the fourth tale. "I can't stand it anymore," he cried out as the fire raged around him. "I can't stand knowing that she'll go. I just want it to be over. I want it to be finished." Once he speaks the truth, he's engulfed in an oblivion, which he welcomes with relief, for he thinks he finally receives the punishment he deserves. After which his inner turmoil is resolved as he is made to realize, through all the stories and his own truth, that contradictions can coexist. Whether the monster is an external being or a figment of Connor's imagination is not revealed in the book. Though it is true that the monster does help Connor deal with his internal crisis, it is important to understand as to why the figure of the monster, whether physically real or not, is employed to deal with or represent a crisis internal to the human. At one of the instances, Connor comes to live with his grandmother and is upset at having to live in her house, with which he felt only a severe lack of any personal connect. He's also upset with his father, who seems to have a cramped house and a busy schedule, living with his other family to make time and space for Connor. At this time, the monster visits Connor to tell him a tale of the parson and the apothecary, which ends with the monster destroying the parson's house. The monster seeks commands from Connor as to what it should destroy next, and eventually asks Connor to join in the destruction. At the end of the destruction, one is told that Connor has actually wrecked his grandmother's house. He stands there, suddenly alone to face the monster, which is no longer there. "What did you do?" he shouted into the suddenly too quiet emptiness. He could barely move his feet from all the destroyed rubbish on the floor. There is no way he could have done it all himself. No way. Was there? In another instance, Connor is at school and wants to be seen and punished because no one seems to notice him, and neither does anyone punish him as they pity him. Harry, the bully at school, knows that Connor awaits being seen and punished, gives up physical violence in Connor, and rather starts ignoring and making Connor feel lonelier and invisible than ever. The monster visits again and narrates the story to Connor about a man who wishes to be seen. "But do you know what I see when I look at you, O'Malley? I see nothing," Harry said. Without turning around, Connor asked the monster a question. "What did you do to help the invisible man?" And he felt the monster's voice rise again, like it was in his own head. "I made them see," it said. Connor clenched his fist even tighter. Then the monster leapt forward to make Harry see. Though the narrative maintains ambiguity over whether Connor and monster are one or separate, in these two episodes they do seem to merge as one. When he is questioned by the headmistress, he claims that it wasn't him but the monster who had done it, to which she says that everyone saw you knocking him down. Similarly, when he destroys his grandma's house, he feels at the end of it that it was no way he could have done it all by himself, but does not find the monster around. The monster in both these events lures Connor to cause destruction. "It is most satisfying," he assures Connor, and the two merge as one. A psychoanalytical reading of the text and the figure of the monster might suggest that the monster is an aspect of Connor's psyche, and that it acts as a critic of Connor's psychic handling of his mother's illness, or that, assuming the monster is not real, Connor's actions are examples of disassociation, and act as a coping mechanism to help him deal with his emotional trauma. David Gilmour also proposes that imaginary monsters of dreams and fantasies represent a clash of the chaotic danger of the id and the punishing superego. Both these impulses are felt strongly by Connor. He finds destruction to be very satisfying, and at the same time yearns to be punished both for indulging in the acts of destruction and for wanting his ordeal to end. It is imperative here to discuss Freud's idea of human psyche that were one of the very crucial points of breaking away from the humanist tradition that valued human reason and rationality as essentializing attributes of the humans. Freud proposed that rationality was only one of the aspects of one's interior life. He theorized that what Aristotle called as mind and Descartes conceptualized as a unified rational entity separate from the body were instead an assemblage of multiple entities, clashing with and opposing one another. He postulated that human psyche is constantly warring against itself, and that a fundamental constituent of human nature is also the irrational. Human life is then conceptualized as a conflict between the irrational and the rational, wherein it is not always the rational that overrides. Human being, according to Freud, constantly struggles to repress his instincts and is an inherently unstable and fragile proposition, constantly teetering on the brink of descent. Connor can be seen battling a similar crisis in his life. However, why the figure of the monster is most suited for such a depiction of human acts of destruction in moments of crisis? The answer could be found in Cohen's analysis of the appeal of the monster. He explains that monstrosity being linked with that which is forbidden so as to formulate the normal and to enforce it makes the monster appealing as it affords escape from constraint. The monster attracts because, along with terrifying, it offers escapist fantasies. He explains how the body of the monster enables safe expression of aggression, domination, and inversion in a space that is delimited and perpetually liminal. He succinctly puts, the simultaneous repulsion and attraction at the core of monster's composition accounts greatly for its cultural popularity and for the fact that the monster seldom can be contained in a simple binary dialectic, thesis, antithesis, no synthesis. We distrust and loathe the monster at the same time envy its freedom. The monster eventually helps Connor because he is able to see that his love for his mother and his wish for her death can coexist within him. Yeah, start to end. A monster figure that debunks limitations imposed by boundaries enable Connor to understand that his truth in letting go of his mother does not make him an evil son. The tales narrated by the monster speak of a post-human condition of human where he is neither one thing nor the other. In fact, the presence of contradictions within the human make him closer to the monstrous. As the monster, Cohen points out, refuses classification based on binary opposition, instead favoring polyphony and mixed response and resistance to integration. The monster, therefore, can represent the non-binary polymorphism at the base of human nature. The probability of several possible ways of existing and being cast a doubt upon the reliability of our understanding of right and wrong. Steve Fuller, in his article Beyond Good and Evil, The Challenge of Trans and Posthumanism, exemplifies the instability of the concepts of right and wrong in a world which we may inhabit in future. He speaks of a possible scenario that explicates his point. Many, if not most, of our moral institutions are predicated on the morality of humans. This is what makes murder heinous, self-sacrifice noble, and suicide problematic. It equally informs the idea that life at all stages is precious. But what happens if death is not only preventable, but also reversible and even commutable? That is, one may die biologically, yet live on digitally. Thus, by doing away with the dualistic mode of thinking about these well-defined categories of good and evil, the monster also predicts the problematics of future. Thank you.
Thank you all for your papers. I have a dinosaur question.
Okay.
I know that people have always been fascinated and entranced by fossils in the fossil record, right? And like the bone wars are deeply interesting. Do you perceive there to be a causal or direct commercial lineage between the subject of your talk and then things like the Jurassic Park franchise?
So they know that they will sell, right? So I think there is like a cynical interest in dinosaurs presently, which is fascinating when weighed against, the long history of people being interested in fossil animals, right? And long before the word dinosaur was coined in 1842 by Richard Owen, people were finding fossils and telling stories about them, right? So there's long been interest, but I think just from the 90s onward, 80s, but really 90s onward, there's been this sort of cynical, commercialized version of Dinomania that like the cycle just keeps reproducing itself, right? So if you go into the children's section of a clothing store or Target or something, there will be dino stuff. Sometimes boy dinos and girl dinos, or sometimes it's unisex dinos. But like, are the kids wearing it because they want it, or are the companies making it because they know that they'll be sold, right? I don't know if that got at your question, but I think we're sort of in a little
That's a
circle.
consumer culture question, right?
Yeah.
It's like chicken or egg argument.
Chicken or dinosaur. I like that joke is always inside me, but I haven't found the perfect
There you
form.
go.
The form I think I can work on.
Hi, thank you all for your talks. They were all so unique in the way that children kind of approach like the monster. I'm 35, so I grew up in kind of like that peak era of like we had Goosebumps, we had Are You Afraid of the Dark? There was a lot of like fear and monster based kind of children's media, and maybe just because I'm not the target market for it anymore, I personally feel like there's been a reduction in that, and I'm someone who kind of feels like that's an important stepping stone for kids to be able to kind of handle difficult emotions in a safe way. And I'm wondering if any of you can speak to either to that topic of like how there seems to have been a reduction, at least in my perception, of like horror or fear-based media appropriate for particular age levels.
Yeah. So ever since the early 1990s, there's been a heightened level of protectionism, particularly for white middle-class American children. And so with that heightened protectionism, you get changes in terms of what critics believe is suitable for children and what is not. So if you look at what passed for a PG film or a PG-13 film in the 80s and what they got away with then, it would never pass today. So the best example that I can use is The Goonies. So The Goonies actually gets away with like swearing and stuff, even though it was in that PG realm. PG, I think it was one of the first PG-13, but no, it was actually PG. And one of the reviewers says like, oh well, Spielberg gets away with it because everybody knows that the kids are like this anyway, right? So like all kids talk like this, so who cares, right? He's just telling the truth. Whereas today, the version is, well, let's not tell the truth. Let's tell the version of truth we want children to have access to. In the meantime, they're just getting their access other ways. So, for example, in Super Dark Times, which is supposedly takes place in the 90s, there's also, it starts out with the two boys, Zach and Josh, in the like den, just talking about girls, going through the yearbook and talking about which girls they would like have sex with, which ones they would like want to have oral sex with, and all this stuff. And in the background, you see a cable television. I totally forgot they used to do this. The cable television with the porn channel, it's all like zzz, because that's how cable used to do it, right? It was like they couldn't completely cut it off, so they would just like go like this until like an image would flash like every, few seconds, and you can see this it's a brilliant storytelling mechanism of the filmmaker. You can see this flash every couple of seconds of porn while these boys, virginal boys, are talking about sex. And so, and I think that there is by the way, no coincidence that this was a film that was unrated.
Yeah, just to add on to what she just said, all over the world, I think there is this emphasis on censorship and control of what children consume. And of course, what could easily be passed down to children maybe 10, 20 years ago, that would be censored now. I think it's all just to do with the genre of children's literature, which is often quite neglected, but also highly guarded. So in that sense, adults are always trying to bowdlerize things and trying to take away that which they find problematic. And even though as far as tackling difficult emotions is concerned, there is a lot of emphasis on therapy and all of these things. But from the books, I think there is this trend where we do see a decline, or we do see this kind of taking away from them the tough topics and things which can be easily and openly discussed. So yeah, it's a phenomena which we find back home in India as well. That stories, what should be given to children, or what should not be given to children. That power dynamic that adults, it would go through the adult down to the child. So that struggle is always there.
one last quick question. Looks like we got one for sure.
Thank you, all of you. These were really unusual presentations. I enjoyed them. So I have more of an appeal than a question. I'm really interested in kids and monsters. And the literature is not very extensive as far as I can determine, the anthropological literature or the psychological literature. But evidently, this is a very widespread phenomenon that at a certain point, children become very preoccupied with monsters. And I wonder if this is because adults scare them with monsters. For instance, there was a lullaby during the period of the Napoleonic Wars sung to English children presenting Napoleon as a monster who's going to come at night and eat them up. Or whether it's something more endogenous, that at a certain point, something happens developmentally with children that inclines them to be preoccupied with monsters. I'm particularly interested in this because my own dehumanization theory, I think I can make a prediction about why and when that occurs, if indeed it is endogenous rather than induced, at least significantly endogenous. So as an appeal, as you all do stuff about kids and monsters, I would be immensely grateful if you come across any resources that might throw light on this. I asked a friend who's a developmental psychologist and who writes on dehumanization, and she said, no, it's an utterly neglected topic. Thank you.
Are you talking from a historical viewpoint or culturally?
Any viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you stuff that I've written, but one of the things that immediately sprang to my mind was, if you look at, for example, the Japanese, they're for many long time, we're telling stories about how children, if they didn't act right, that they would get taken away, like spirited away, which is one. That's the reason why Miyazaki's film is called Spirited Away, because it's basically like a modern retelling of this very, very, very old threat to children, right?
Yeah.
You can also look at, for example, the Vikings, right? The original Vikings, and how they would take children's teeth to help them fight in battle, and they believed that it was good luck, and so they'd have to convince children to give them their teeth, right? There's something precious about children that ends up getting connected to kind of the monstrosity of human, right? Think about that, children's teeth to win bloody battles, right? So, but talk to me.
Well, I know children are acutely aware of their vulnerability, that the giants that inhabit their world could snap their neck at any moment. Mm-hmm. And, perhaps that feeds into it. But I want to distinguish between vulnerability to adult power and monstrosity. Mm-hmm. Again, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. I'll quickly say that the thing about dinosaurs is they're safe, right?
Yeah.
So they're big, they're scary, they're dead, right? Super dead. They're not all big, they're not all scary, but right, this is the sort of psychological explanation that other people have taken up that I don't explore in my own work, but they are safe. The dinosaur will not hurt you.
I have a little nephew in Jamaica who is a dinosaur fanatic. And when he was visiting over the summer, I purchased a little dinosaur, plastic dinosaur for him, and he's very maternal with this dinosaur. He shares food with it, looks after it, he bathes it. Yeah. It's really quite interesting.
And I think that's why it's so urgent to tell better stories with dinosaurs, right?
Yeah.
To not pull them into
these
sort of consumer culture cycles, because there is this deep connection.
Yeah.